Good morning. My name is Dr. Janet Morgan, and I'm here today to present Shruti Tekwani at our 2015 Mental Health and Happiness Summit. And I would like to say that she has been a joy and pleasure to get to know, and I think that you will truly enjoy her presentation and her talk. I'm excited to be able to do this interview. Shruti, welcome.
Thank you, Janet. Good morning to you, and thank you for being here.
I'm excited. Shruti, would you please tell us kind of the beginning of your story? I'm going to start way back in the day, and then we'll bring it all up. But because I find that, I know that we're going to have listeners that struggle with certain issues, and I think that if you will tell your story and the things you've overcome, I think that will really help them along the way too. So could you start at, I guess, the beginning? Thank you.
I'll start at the beginning, 32 years ago. I was born in India, and my parents and my sister and I decided, when I was 6 years old, we decided to move to the Caribbean, a little island called Curacao. My sister is 4 years younger than me, and she was diagnosed with cerebral palsy very soon after she was born. So my parents made the decision to move to Curacao because the resources were a lot better in the West at the time. India was not a place that they wanted to raise her, which was a great decision. It turned out we went over to Curacao when I was 6 years old. I grew up there. And then when I was 18, I moved to Boston for my undergrad degree and absolutely fell in love with that city and stayed for 13 years. I graduated. Yeah.
Wow, yeah.
I always knew I wasn't an island girl, and I always knew I wanted to get off the island, but I just didn't know where until I found Boston. I did my undergraduate degree in psychology and social work, and I got my master's degree while working at a college in downtown Boston. I did a lot of crisis work. I was a resident director at a school in the middle of Boston, so a lot of exposure to a lot of different situations where I got to practice my skills. And at the same time, I got my master's at Northeastern University in counseling psychology. A couple years ago, I graduated, and I am not a U.S. citizen, and my work visa had expired, so I moved back to Curacao. Not my first choice, but I thought it was a good time to spend some time with my parents and sister. And I found that the 13 years I was away, I visited them a lot, but I didn't quite have enough time with my sister. I just wanted more. So I went back, and I was kind of lost for the last couple of years because my heart was in Boston, and I really wanted to be in Boston. But now I go back and forth. I just come here as often as I can, and I do a lot of project work. I'm involved a lot with the Glasser Institute. I do practice in Curacao. I also work at the international school at times, and I get pretty busy. I get kept busy, but I'm looking to move back permanently at some point.
Especially to Boston, or are you open to other areas as well?
I'm open to other areas.
Okay. And tell me, what was the first difference, the culture difference? I can't imagine there being a, any larger cultural difference than being on an island and then in Boston, a big city like that.
Well, a big city like Boston allows you to kind of do your thing, and you can, go to the movies without necessarily bumping into someone you know, whereas Curacao is not like that. People know each other. It's a very small island. My sister, she's a very loving person. She's 4 years younger than me. She's 28 years old, and it seems like she knows the whole island. Wherever we go, even if people don't recognize me, they recognize her, or they recognize me as Megha's sister, which is great. I love the fact that as a community they know her and they love her.
Hmm.
That's just not what I'm looking for myself.
You're
I'm, I'm,
ready to move on. Hmm.
I'm looking to go to dinner or the movies, or a walk downtown without necessarily bumping into someone I know.
So you've had a mental health background.
Yes.
And how would you describe mental health and happiness as a professional first, and then privately? Kind of, is there a difference there, or is it overall generally the same?
It's overall generally the same. Before I
Hmm.
really got into the field, I, like a lot of people, just describe mental health as the absence of mental illness. And
Hmm.
I no longer think that way because I think being mentally healthy means that you can get to your best. I mean, everybody has a purpose. Everybody has a purpose in life. Everybody's here for a certain reason. Everybody does certain things really well. And when you are mentally healthy and happy, you can pursue that purpose. And when you're not, things don't make sense anymore. And that's where self care comes into place. But things don't make sense, and you're not able to do that when you're not mentally healthy and happy. And so I think being mentally and healthy and happy means that you're taking care of yourself, you're in a good place where you can recognize your purpose, where you are living the life that you want to live. And at the end of the day, when you're ready for bed, you feel accomplished, you feel okay, and you feel serene.
Hmm. And what things make up that? What things during the day do you think?
Well, of course, it's different for
Yep.
everybody.
Hmm.
I'm the type of person I love interacting with people. I love the sense of accomplishment when I've interacted with someone and I feel like either they got something out of it or I got something out of it, or both. That would be a bonus. It doesn't have to be through work, but even a great conversation with a friend after a few years, going out to dinner, catching up, talking about life, and then reflecting on it, and really getting something out of that, and knowing that they got something out of that really helps sometimes.
Hmm.
And for me, that's it. It's all about the relationships with people. I mean, that's what my career is about. That's what my life is about.
Hmm.
That for me is a good day when I've had a great conversation I can reflect on, either do something with, either it inspires me to do something with in the future, or reflect back on something that's happened and something to improve on.
Now, in 2006, you received an award. Can you tell me about that? Because I was so excited when I saw that. I thought, oh my goodness, that's really an accomplishment. Can you explain about that?
Sure. So right after undergrad, I graduated in 2005, and right after undergrad, 3 days after graduation, I got my first professional full-time job working as a resident director at Wentworth Institute of Technology in the middle of Boston. And in the field of higher ed, we're all about the encouragement and the awards, and making sure that we're always on our toes because the field changes every year. When I first started off in the field, Facebook didn't exist. That wasn't a thing. And
Right.
now it kind of rules how we communicate with students. So this conference that I went to was actually in New York City, and it was called the Nyakuho Conference. It was for people in the Northeast who work in housing departments on college campuses, and that's what I did. And the case study competition, I remember the topic being about transgender students and how would you handle it if you had a transgender student coming to campus, where at that time a lot of campuses, they were not gender neutral for housing, and you
Hmm.
kind of pick, do you want to live in a male suite or a female suite? And so what happens if you have a gender neutral student? And the competition was all about how you would accommodate that with a certain budget and how you would get the higher ups on board, and things like that. So it was myself and two other people, and I think we had like 12 hours or something to kind of get everything we needed and present it. So that's what we won.
Well, congratulations on that. That's quite an accomplishment.
Mhm.
And I also know that as a resident, did they call them RA still, a resident assistant or a
Well,
resident director or?
the resident directors
Hmm.
supervise. They
Hmm.
supervise
Oh,
resident
okay.
assistants
And
both,
you
but
had some you had some challenges during that position, is that right?
I did have some challenges. So the nature of the position is that when you're on duty, when you're on call, and the phone rings, you don't know what you're getting. It could be a burst pipe, or it could be a student who doesn't like their roommate. It could be an attempted suicide. There are a lot of mental health issues that come up in that role. In that role itself, I was not a counselor. So I was the first responder, and then I would kind of refer to whatever department on campus needed that was needed at the time. So it was nice because I got to show up when it was actually happening, and the crisis piece is what I really like. And then I wasn't necessarily the one kind of doing the counseling, so that was a very different role. And I had, you're right, I did have a lot of challenges because it's the nature of the position where you work a full day, you go to sleep, and then you get woken up at 3 in the morning. And sometimes it's something silly like a kid was found with a beer, and the RAs write them up, and you make sure that the situation is kind of under control, and you go back to sleep. And sometimes it's a roommate that wants to kill his roommate and tries to kill his roommate. And then, of course, sometimes, like I said, it's mental health, and that takes a lot longer to tease out and get the counselors on call. And those situations used to drag on sometimes for days, and it's not as easy to go back to sleep.
Hmm. So as the director, you had other resident people
As,
under you then?
yeah, as a resident director, I had resident assistants
Hmm.
under me, and there were 5 resident directors on campus at the time. Now there are more, but
Hmm. And did you find that did that draw you or use all of your abilities, you think, or did you reach out and kind of want to or find something there that spurred you on to do what your passion is now?
well, before getting into that role of being a resident director, I always knew I wanted to do something psychology based, and I knew it was either counseling or clinical psychology based. I knew from the very beginning that I did not want to work with little children because I love little children, and for me, I don't want that to be my work. For me, children are meant to be loved, and that's where I want to leave it. I don't want that to be my work. And it's hard for me to see little kids in crisis.
Hmm.
So I always knew I wanted to do something with psychology, but being in the resident director role, it just amplified my want to be in a role of crisis manager
Hmm.
and to help people in crisis. Um, through those years, I focused my interest on trauma and grief counseling.
Hmm.
And I don't know if I would have reached that if I hadn't been a resident director.
Hmm. And what are you doing in that field right now? And what spurred you to kind of go into there and create what you're doing right now?
Well, I did have a situation when I was a resident director where it was very common to hire resident assistants. The whole housing department would kind of come together and, kind of decide. I think one year we had 20 positions open and we had 108 applications, and we would pick and choose and interview people and hire RAs that we thought would fit best. So we hired RAs. Unfortunately, sometimes we had to terminate employment when the contract was breached. And I had done this so many times, and it never felt good, but it was okay. That was part of the job. And then one year in 2009, we terminated a resident assistant, and he was a really good student. He was a very good student, senior, about to graduate in a few months, and a few hours later, he actually took his life. And so it took a long time to kind of deal with that and feel the emotions of that. It's been it'll be 6 years, and I'm still feeling the emotions of that. But through that, and through working with Kim Over, the executive director,
Mm-hmm.
for my practicum to become certified, I realized that I wanted to do something with those feelings, and I wanted to create a program that would help therapists or helpers deal with the loss of a client's suicide. And so with that, I developed a choice theory-based program called Grief Relief, and it helps helpers deal with the loss of a client. Not only that, but it kind of targets guilt in general. There's so many different situations where we're left with guilt, even if we're not directly impacted. You know, the cable man comes in to fix the cable, leaves, and then a few minutes later, somebody takes their life, and they were the last person to see them. They don't know that person, but the guilt is still there. And
Still there. Mm-hmm.
yeah, or a pilot who lands a plane, or where there's a plane crash and the pilot survives, but a passenger dies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are the type of situations that are kind of
So you've
attractive.
developed a program for this.
I have, yes. The website
And
is still under construction, but
okay, I was going to ask where can we find it because I think that as a professional that would be important for for me. I'd love to see it so I could learn how the process that you've developed.
the website is griefreliefinternational.com, but it is under construction.
Okay, super.
It's running by
If there's anything you need that maybe we can add to, please let us know. I'd like to contribute in some way. It's very important. Also, I read about your research project. It was published in the journal.
yeah.
Could you kind of talk about that? Because I'm a former Army medic, and my husband's a physician, and I know there's some, health professionals, and I know this was specifically for health professionals, which I find is, I think there's such a need for health professionals to know how to deal with people because a lot of times they don't. So can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So when I was getting ready to leave the country in 2012, I took a reality therapy class as part of my graduate work. It was just your average 3-credit course. It fit my schedule. I had always heard about reality therapy, and I didn't quite know what it was. And I took this course, and it was over 2 weekends. It was 5 days long. After the first day, I realized that this was something I could really kind of get on board with, and I wanted to go deeper into it. And I learned that it was a certification program, that it would take a while. I wasn't sure how realistic it was to do, considering I was leaving the country. But I had a wonderful mentor at the time, Dr. Mary Watson, who was now retired from Northeastern University. But she was really good in just pushing me and trying to figure out what it was that I wanted out of this. And she said, okay, if you want to get certified, we'll do what we can to get you what you need before you leave. And I ended up doing my practicum with her before I left the country, which was very helpful because then I could move on and do Skype practicums with Kim Over. And through that practicum, we realized that in our class, we had 21 people, and a lot of them were health professionals. There were a lot of nurses, there were 2 physicians, there were a couple of PT professionals, and a lot of audiology professionals. And they talked a lot about how they would use reality therapy with their patients, the patients that didn't want to wear the hearing aid. And just the kind of the cranky patients that didn't want to be there, and they wanted the help, but they didn't want to do the work that it took. So we got talking in that, and another classmate of mine and I worked with Dr. Watson for the practicum, and through that we said, you know what, we should really do some research on this. And we tend to think of reality therapy being used with counselors a lot, At least that's what the past has said. But especially looking at this class, I think there were only 3 counselors in the class. And we found that to be interesting. So we took that a step further and we worked on this research for, it was about, I think it was about 15 or 18 months that we worked on it
Wow.
for. And
Mm-hmm.
we got the help of another professor at Northeastern who was really good with research and qualitative studies. And it was something I was able to do from Curacao.
Mm-hmm.
The 3 of them were in Boston, and every time I would come to Boston, we would meet and we made it work.
Mm-hmm. So what did you find out as what was your question or your hypothesis?
It wasn't necessarily a question per se, it was just to find out how it was being used and if the students who had taken the class with Dr. Watson, she'd been teaching it for years, and
Mm-hmm.
we went back as far as we could go to research and ask these former students, do you use it? Do you use it personally? Do you use it professionally? How do you use it? What do you find? What are the barriers? And we
Mm-hmm.
compiled information and we found that a lot of people do use it. Now, of course, the people that agreed to be interviewed were the ones we found that, were using it. The
Mm-hmm.
ones that didn't get back to us, I'm not sure if they would be using it or not, but
Mm-hmm.
we did found that it was being used and it is helpful. And a lot of healthcare professionals do use it once they know about it.
Mm-hmm. So did they use it mainly in their lives or both professionally and personally? Oh, okay.
Professionally,
Mm-hmm.
a
And
lo- sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I know that when I first learned about reality therapy, that was the one thing that impressed me most. I think is that I could use it in my personal life and help myself so much, and that empowered me to even be a better counselor, supporter for my clients because I struggled the same struggles a lot of times as they did. And it was easier to relate to them, how to get a good professional relationship with them, right? Because I understood, kind of the difficulties it would have. I'm very interested because your class was so strong in that health field. I wonder if we could um, focus on that in the future because I see that there's such a need, especially now with the healthcare changing so much, how people are so nervous and scared, how it would help them, if they knew, um, if the professionals knew how to relate to their clients and patients. I
And
thought that would,
not use external control. Yeah, I think
yeah.
that would be very helpful.
hmm I did an interview with a physician yesterday, and that was one of the things that I found is that he said, we need to have better relationships with our clients, and I thought that was prolific. I can't wait to move forward with that thought. So tell me about happiness. When you're looking at mental health and happiness, and now that you've done all this research and with the grief and loss, how do you see that for someone who is struggling? What things do you think that would be important for them? Looking at your life and what advice would you give people to move forward?
Well, with grief and loss, and yeah, some of my own experience, um, losing that student, of course, was horrible. And then the other kind of big event in my life recently has been the move back to Curacao, which um, yeah, I believe that I had a choice. I could have stayed, but it wasn't my first choice. It really it was not what I wanted to do at all. So in a lot of ways, that was also a grieving process for me.
hmm
I think that happiness is always there for everybody. It exists for everybody. It's a matter of seeing it and going back to being mentally healthy. At times, you can't always see it. It's always there. It's just that when you are unhappy with your own thoughts or with your own situation, or you just cannot see it, that tends to be a problem. But everyone has situations, people that make them happy or that they are happy around. And
Mm-hmm.
it really is a matter of perception and choosing to see it. And it's not always easy to choose happiness because sometimes you don't realize it's available to you.
Mm-hmm. So what would you how would you advise someone then if they're struggling in their life? How would you advise them to search out that for the happy thoughts, so to speak?
Well, the first question I ask is, can you think back to the last time you were happy,
Mm-hmm.
truly happy? What was that? What was that like? What did that mean? Who were you around? What were your circumstances? And what's different now? And of course, we can't travel back in time, but sometimes it helps to pick apart what it was about that situation that they were so happy, that they were thriving in.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is it? Okay, for me, it was, Boston offered me freedom. Boston offered me my own life, my own apartment, my car, where I could get in the car at 2 in the morning and take a drive. Not that I did, but I could. And
Right.
it's not the car and it's not Boston, but it's the feeling of freedom that
Mm-hmm.
that allowed me happiness. And how can I get that in my current situation? Who do I need to talk to make that happen? What are the barriers? Curacao not exactly a safe place anymore. So I can't get in my
Mm-hmm.
car and take a drive at 2 in the morning. But acknowledging what it is that I feel like I'm lacking will really help me realize, okay, maybe I can get that freedom somewhere else.
So you can help people look at alternatives. If you can't have it one way, maybe what else can you do to be happy?
And
Mm-hmm.
I do like to go back to the basic needs. I know there are people listening that are not familiar with choice theory, but going back to those basic needs is really important because if they aren't being met, things go haywire.
Mm-hmm. And it's easy to ask someone what's lacking in your life, right now, and they sometimes they get confused, but still they kind of know, something's not right. I don't feel good. There's something wrong. And when you explore, like you said, if you go back a little bit, when was the last time you were happy? What were you doing? I love to use that question in marriage counseling because a lot of times, well, a couple has they go through bad times, but they've also had really good times, and you can tell. You notice a shift in even in the body. They shift back because all of a sudden you're giving a good memory. And I think that even with myself, I think, when was the last, what was I doing that gave me such pleasure, a few years ago, or oh man, I was blah 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 or whatever, and I can think, I want to do that again. I love fishing. Fishing gives me a great pleasure, and I can remember. I mean, I only go, certain during the summer, but it lasts for a long time. It gives me such pleasure, and every time I eat fish, it brings back that whole pleasure of fishing. So even though it's a small part of my year, I capture that, and I can continue it. So let me ask you, what would you like the audience to take away from our talk today?
Well, I would like them to remember that it is a choice. Mental health and happiness is a choice, and it's not always easy to see, but it is there. It is there somewhere hidden inside. It's just a matter of surrounding yourself with the right people to remind you sometimes.
And how do you suggest when we're looking at the idea that it is a choice, how do you suggest we think that? How do we, it's easy that we say that, but how do we think I have a choice? Because sometimes like you right now, you're back on the island, and it's not your primary choice, but how do you find happiness even in that situation?
Well, I ask myself, and I ask clients this too, do I like what I'm feeling? And when I'm unhappy, no, I usually don't like what I'm feeling. Sometimes I choose to be unhappy. I'll give myself a few days. All right, fine, I'm angry about the situation. it will serve me well to be angry, and maybe in the future it'll be a lesson to not let myself get in that situation again, or to be sad about something, or to feel guilty about something. Sometimes I choose guilt because it's a safe place. It's a place where I can remember the person.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes happiness is not a choice that we as people always pick. So I do ask myself, am I enjoying this feeling of anger when I'm sitting in rush hour traffic and everyone's blaring their horns around me? Am I enjoying this feeling of feeling anxiety because I can't get to my destination in time? Well, no. Okay, well, I can't control the traffic and I don't like this feeling. So what am I doing? And it's very simple to think about in terms of traffic, because that's not a personal crisis. But
Mm-hmm.
once you start practicing it with little things like traffic, it feels more natural to ask yourself that question when the bigger stuff happens. And then it's easier to apply. No, I don't like this feeling. What can I do about it? What's within my control to do about it? And sometimes even admitting that you don't have control over certain things is very freeing. It's very liberating. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have control over the US government or my visa situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big burden off my shoulder.
Yes. Yes. But you're doing things, even though you've moved back to the island, you're still doing things like right now you're visiting family and friends somewhere else. So to give you some sense of freedom and joy.
And I'm still very involved in a lot of things that I would normally be involved in if I lived here.
Hmm. When you were talking about basic needs, could you elaborate a little bit more on the basic needs, how we can satisfy those?
Sure. So I am a very high love and belonging need person. I love people. I love relationships. I need to feel loved constantly. I need to
Hmm.
be told I'm loved constantly. Um, One of the mistakes I made when I first moved back on the island was, well, I'm not sure if it was a mistake, but I hadn't been there for so long. I used to go visit a lot, but when I did go and visit, I used to spend time with my parents and my sister. I didn't see a lot of friends. A lot of friends had moved off the island. A lot of friends had changed. A lot of them were married with kids. The situation was very different. And plus, when I did live there, I didn't enjoy it. So I wasn't looking forward to rekindle a lot of these friendships. But what I would have done differently is I would have still gone ahead and, gone out with people, made those connections, because that's the key that I miss the most about Boston. I have a lot of friends in Boston. They've become family to me. They're still family to me. But that was the biggest piece I was missing in Curacao. And so when I talk,
Relation.
right, the relationships, and
Yeah.
I took it for granted that I would be okay with just my parents and my sister, and they're lovely people, but that's not enough for me.
Hmm. So what did you do differently then? How are you cultivating new relationships in your situation?
Well, I started joining different organizations even on the island. They're not as many as they have in Boston, but there's some.
Hmm.
The American Women's Club was kind enough to accept me, even though I'm not technically American. But I found myself feeling at home with them because I
Hmm.
miss that American culture piece.
Hmm.
Through that, I have some really great friends that I've made, and that's made a world of difference. When I have plans in Curacao, when I know, okay, this weekend I'm seeing this person for dinner, and I'm going to the beach with this person, that love and belonging piece has made all the difference for me.
And so your recommendation then would be to look at what you made you happy before and see how to
How
work
to
your life into.
peace and going back to the needs, I'm high love and belonging. I am also high freedom.
Hmm.
Power for me, yeah, I like to have power at work. I like to have power in my own life. I like to have control in my own life. I don't necessarily need to have power or control over other people's lives. But that wasn't as important. So knowing yourself and what needs are high for you and realizing when they're lacking.
Hmm.
Now that I look back, it was so obvious to me, but I didn't see it at the time.
Hmm. So now, what are you looking for your future? I love your new grief and loss. The program. I think that's going to be dynamic, and I'm thinking about you're back in a different culture, but you can still do a lot with that there. And what are your plans then? How are you looking at moving forward with what you've been doing?
Well, my short-term plans are that I am taking the licensure exam to
Hmm.
actually be a counselor in Massachusetts. I'll be taking that in a few weeks, and then after that, I'll probably continue with the job search. The job
Hmm.
search has been on a standstill because I decided licensure was time, and things are set in motion, and I have what I need for requirements. So that's what's happening. After that, the
Hmm.
job search will start, so I can permanently come back here and stop living out of a suitcase. And I will plan on continuing the grief relief program because I think it is very important. And if I could do that the rest of my life, I would be very happy.
Hmm. Okay. Well, Shruti, I have enjoyed this very much. Is there any last bits of knowledge you'd like to share with anyone?
No, just know yourself, trust your gut. I'm very big on intuition.
Yes, I saw the quote on Facebook yesterday, and I thought, oh, I've got to tell people. And it's, when you have a decision between, what is it, your heart and your head,
When you're
choose your heart.
confused
Yeah, go
between
ahead.
what your heart is saying and your head is saying, trust your gut. And know yourself. When something feels wrong, it usually is.
Hmm.
No one can
That's
do that for you.
I love that as a end piece. So thank you so much, Shruti, for sharing. And I hope you have a great day. And I hope the listeners, if they need to find you, they can look on your grief site.
Yep,
And could you tell the site again so we can
of course.
um,
The
uh-huh.
site is griefreliefinternational.com. It is under construction, but
Hmm.
my email is also shruti@yahoo.com, and I can be reached there as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Shruti. And you
Thank
have a blessed day. Thank you.
you.
Bye.